He didn't stop for strangers. Not anymore. But when his horse reared back on that sun-scorched trail and Ethan Cole saw her, a pregnant woman, on her hands and knees in the dirt alone, her broken wagon listing sideways in the heat, something older than his grief moved through him. Something he thought had died. He stepped down from the saddle without a word. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end, and drop your city in the comments below so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1879 came down hard on the Montana Territory. Not the kind of hard that made men complain about the heat. The kind of hard that dried up creek beds and cracked the soil open like old wounds. The kind that pushed cattle into the shade of pine ridges and kept horses nervous and short-tempered from sunup to sundown. The mountains held the heat different than the flatlands. Up here it pressed down from above and rose from the ground both at once, and there was nowhere to escape it. Ethan Cole had stopped noticing it years ago. He rode the high trail alone, the way he did everything, without hurry, without conversation, without any particular expectation that the day would deliver anything worth remarking on. His horse, a dark bay named Cutter, moved through the dry grass at an easy pace. Ethan's hat brim was pulled low. His jaw was set. His eyes tracked the ridgeline the way a man's eyes do when he's trained himself to watch for threats but no longer expects them. He was 39 years old, and he looked like a man who had earned every one of those years the hard way. 6 feet and lean through the shoulders, with hands that were rough from rope work and fence building and the thousand small brutalities of running a cattle operation alone on the eastern slope of the Beartooth Range. He didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The only living things that required conversation from him were his 4 horses and the occasional stray calf that wandered too close to the tree line. Everything else in his life had learned to make do without his words. That was how he preferred it. He had not always been a solitary man. There had been a time, and it felt like someone else's life now, like a story he'd been told about a stranger, when Ethan Cole had a wife, a small ranch in the valley, and enough hope in his chest that it actually ached. Sometimes the good kind of ache that comes from wanting things and believing you might get them. Her name had been Margaret, and their son had been named Thomas. He'd been 4 years old. They were gone now, 3 years gone, and Ethan had done what grieving men sometimes do when the world takes everything from them at once. He'd moved higher up the mountain, pulled the road in behind him, and decided that the only life worth living was one small enough that losing it wouldn't destroy what was left of him. It was a strategy. It wasn't living. But he hadn't figured out the difference yet. He was halfway down the long switchback that descended toward the lower meadow when Cutter stopped. Not the slow, distracted stop of a horse that wanted grass. The hard, sudden stop of an animal that had heard or smelled something that didn't fit. Ethan sat very still. His hand didn't go to his rifle. Not yet. He just listened. Wind through the pine needles. A hawk somewhere far above. The dry creak of something wood, maybe. And then barely there, beneath the other sounds, a voice. A woman's voice. He almost didn't recognize it as such. It was too thin, too broken. More like breath shaped into sound than actual words. But it was there, rising and falling in the heat shimmer at the bottom of the trail where it curved around a stand of cottonwood trees. Ethan sat another long moment. He had a rule about this kind of thing. He had a lot of rules. Rules were what kept a man at the correct distance from the world. And one of his clearest rules was that he did not involve himself in other people's trouble. Not because he was cruel, he understood the difference between cruelty and self-preservation. But because he had learned at a cost that had nearly killed him that getting involved meant caring, and caring meant exposure. And exposure meant that the next time the world decided to take something from you, it would find you standing right out in the open with nothing between you and the loss. He had not stood out in the open in 3 years. So he sat on Cutter and listened to the woman's voice and told himself it was probably nothing. Probably a traveler with a lame horse or a stuck wheel. Probably someone with family nearby. Probably someone who didn't need a silent mountain cowboy making her situation more complicated. Cutter shifted under him. The horse could feel his hesitation. "Easy," Ethan said quietly. Then the voice came again, and this time the wind brought it up the trail clear enough that he could make out the words. "Please! Somebody, please!" He was moving before he'd made the conscious decision to move. Cutter picked the path down around the cottonwoods at a careful trot, and when they came around the bend, Ethan pulled up short. The wagon had come off the trail on the outside of the curve where the ground dropped away into a dry gully. One of the rear wheels had broken clean through the spokes, splintered the rim bent at an angle that made it obvious there was no fixing it out here, not with anything a traveler would be carrying. The wagon had lurched sideways when the wheel gave way, and it had stopped only because the left front wheel had caught on a boulder. It sat at a precarious tilt, the canvas cover hanging loose on one side. The horse that had been pulling it, a thin chestnut mare, stood in the traces, with her head low spent, from heat and effort not attempting to pull anymore. She'd given up. The traces had tangled when the wagon listed, and she'd simply stopped. And on the ground beside the wagon on her hands and knees in the dirt, and the heat, was a woman. She was young, late 20s maybe. Brown hair that had come loose from whatever arrangement it had started the day in. A dress that was pale blue and now covered in trail dust. One hand pressed flat to the earth. One hand pressed to her side. She was very, very pregnant. Ethan's chest did something complicated. He ignored it. He stepped down from Cutter without a word and looped the reins over the wagon's sideboard. He moved toward her, keeping his footsteps deliberate so he wouldn't startle her. She hadn't seen him yet. Her head was down. "Ma'am!" She flinched so hard she nearly fell sideways. Her head came up, and for a moment her eyes, dark brown wide with pain, and something rawer than fear, went straight to his gun belt. It was the first thing women alone on the trail always checked. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. He said it flat because he didn't know how else to say things. "What happened?" She stared at him for another second. Then her face crumpled, not into weakness he would understand later, but into the particular kind of relief that breaks over a person when they've been holding themselves together so hard for so long that the sight of another human face is almost more than they can stand. "The wheel," she managed. "The wheel broke, and I can't." She stopped, pressed harder on her side. "Something's wrong. How long have you been down?" An hour maybe. I don't know." She tried to push herself upright and couldn't, and the sound she made trying not to cry out was the kind of sound that settled somewhere in Ethan's sternum and didn't leave. "My name is Rose Calloway. I'm traveling alone. I know it was foolish. I know it, but I didn't have a choice. I didn't have—" "Ma'am." He cut her off, not unkindly. "I don't need your justifications. I need to know if it's the baby or something else." She blinked. Then something shifted in her face, some small recalibration, like she'd expected judgment and received something different. "I don't know. The pain started about 20 minutes ago. It might be from trying to manage the horse when the wheel, but it might not be." Ethan crouched down to her level. He looked at her face, the color of it, the set of her jaw. He'd helped 2 mares foal in the last year, and he was not in the practice of comparing women to horses, but he understood bodies under strain. He understood pain and how people hid it. She was hiding a great deal of it right now. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so. If you—" She reached a hand out. He took it, steady, careful, without ceremony. He got her to her feet slowly, and she stood with one hand on his arm and one hand pressed to her lower back, breathing through her teeth. "All right," he said. "I just need to rest a moment," she said. "If you could help me get the wheel off that rock so the horse can—" "Your horse is done," Ethan said. "Look at her." Rose looked. The mare's sides were heaving in a way that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with the heat and the exhaustion underneath it. Rose's face went through several things in quick succession, denial, calculation, and then a grief that was clearly about more than the horse. "She belonged to my husband," Rose said quietly. Ethan said nothing. He waited. "He died," she said. 4 months ago. I've been trying to get to my sister in Billings. She said she'd—" Rose stopped, straightened her spine. He watched her do it, watched her consciously rebuild whatever wall had come down when she'd first seen him. "I'm sorry, you don't need my troubles." "How far along?" he asked. She looked up at him. "The baby," he clarified. 7 months. A pause. "Almost 8. His jaw tightened. He turned toward the wagon. "What do you have in here that you absolutely cannot leave?" She stared at him. "What?" "Your wagon is not moving today. Your horse cannot pull it if it was. If you've got things in there you need, we take them now." "What can't you leave?" Rose Calloway looked at the tilted wagon, at the broken wheel, at the spent mare standing in the traces, and he watched understanding settle over her, the way it does when a person stops arguing with a situation and begins to accept it. "There's a trunk," she said. "In the back. It has papers, and some clothes, and a box." "What's in the box?" Something crossed her face, brief and guarded. "Nothing that concerns anyone but me." He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he turned toward the wagon. "Stay there." He climbed up into the tilted bed without ceremony and found the trunk immediately old solid, bound with leather straps. He dragged it to the tailgate. Then he found a smaller box beneath a folded quilt, cedar-sided, latched shut. He added it to the tailgate. Rose had managed to make her way around to the back of the wagon. She was watching him. "You didn't have to—" "Which thing's on top of those?" he asked, nodding at the rest of the wagon's contents. She hesitated. "The quilt, and there's a lantern that was my mother's." He handed them down without comment. Then he climbed down, checked the straps on Cutter's saddlebags, and started considering how to manage the weight distribution. "You'll ride," he said. "I'll walk. I'm not putting you out of your saddle." He looked at her. Just looked. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you are 7 months pregnant, possibly in early labor, standing on a trail in the Montana Territory, with no horse, no working wagon, and approximately 4 hours until sundown. You are going to ride." Her chin lifted. He noted it, the reflex of a woman who'd spent years not being argued with. "I don't know you." "No?" He agreed. "You don't. For all I know, you could be—" "Could be what?" he asked. Not aggressive, just direct. She stopped. Looked at his hands. Looked at his face. He had the patience to let her look because he understood what she was doing. She was taking stock of him the way a person does when they're making a decision they can't unmake. "You're not going to hurt me," she said finally. It wasn't a question anymore. "No," he said. "Why not?" And this question, he understood, was not about him specifically. It was about all of them. Every man she had encountered on this road. Every man who had looked at a woman alone and made a calculation. Ethan Cole thought about his wife. He thought about Margaret in the last year of her life, how stubborn she'd been, how she'd refused help until it was too late to be helped. He thought about what it would have meant to him in those years if a stranger had simply said no. "I will not leave you here." "Because it's the right thing," he said. Rose Calloway looked at him for a long moment. Then she pressed her lips together, nodded once, and moved toward Cutter. He helped her up into the saddle, a process that was not graceful and required patience from both of them, and adjusted the stirrups and settled the smaller box in front of her where she could hold it against her with one arm. "Hold the saddle horn," he said. "Not the reins. I'll lead." "Your ranch," she said. "How far, ye? 2 hours on foot. Maybe less." She looked out at the trail ahead. The mountains rose on either side of it, pine dark and enormous, and the sky above was that particular blue that only happens in Montana in August, too saturated to look real, too big to take in all at once. "I'm going to repay you," she said. "Whatever this costs you, I will find a way." "Don't worry about that now," he said. "It matters to me." He looked up at her, shielding his eyes against the glare. "I know it does," he said quietly. "That's not what I'm worried about right now." He took Cutter's lead and started walking. They didn't speak much on the way up. He watched the trail, and she watched the mountains, and somewhere in the silence between them, the afternoon aged toward evening, and the heat began very slowly to release its grip. He had set himself a different pace than usual, slower, watching the horse's movement, watching her face. She wasn't complaining. That told him things about her that she probably hadn't intended to reveal. She held the cedar box against herself with one arm and the saddle horn with the other, and she kept her back straight, and she breathed through the pain when it came, and she did not make a sound. He noticed all of it. He did not ask about the pain again until they had crested the second ridge and the ranch came into view below the low-roofed main house, the barn, the horse pasture still holding the day's last light in the grass. "Still coming?" he asked. "Intermittently," she said. "Maybe 10 minutes apart." He stopped walking. She noticed. "Keep going," she said. "Please. I need to be somewhere that isn't the middle of a trail." 10 minutes is concerning. I know. Her voice was entirely steady. He had the feeling she had been practicing that steadiness for months. But it's been 10 minutes apart for the last hour, and it hasn't changed, so either it's something else or it's very, very early. Either way, we're better off moving. He studied her face for another moment. Then he started walking again. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't quite a question. A long pause. "I had a daughter," Rose said. 2 years ago. She lived 4 days. Ethan said nothing. He kept walking. He understood in the way that broken people understand each other without requiring elaboration exactly what those 4 days had cost her. Exactly what kind of weight she was carrying into this second pregnancy. Exactly how much courage it had taken to walk up to this particular fear all over again. He didn't say any of that. What he said was, "I've got a spare room. It's plain, but the roof doesn't leak." He heard her exhale, slow, careful, like she was holding the grief back until she had somewhere safe to set it down. "Thank you," she said, very quietly. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You haven't seen the cooking." And to his considerable surprise, Rose Calloway laughed. It was small, barely a sound, but it was real, and it moved through the evening air between them and settled somewhere in his chest in a place that had been closed for a very long time. He didn't examine it. He just kept walking. The ranch house was clean. He was not a man who tolerated mess, not because anyone had taught him to care about appearances, but because the discipline of order had kept him functional through the worst of his grief. He'd learned early that a man whose surroundings are in chaos will eventually stop being able to manage himself. So the house was clean, and there was firewood stacked inside, and the spare room had a bed with a real mattress that had belonged to his mother. And when Rose stepped through the door and looked around at all of it, she stopped walking. "You live here alone?" she said. "Yes." "It doesn't look like it." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing and gestured toward the hallway. "Bedroom's this way." She followed him. He showed her the room. She stood in the doorway looking at the bed, the way some people look at things they don't believe they're permitted to want. "I don't want to impose," she said. "Ma'am." He stopped, turned toward her. "You are not imposing. You are a woman who needs a safe place to sleep tonight, and I have one. That's the entire situation." She looked at him for a long moment. In the fading light through the window, he could see how tired she was. The kind of tired that went past the body and into something deeper. The kind of tired that comes from carrying more than your share for too long. "My husband's name was William," she said. "It seemed to come from nowhere. He died of fever. We were supposed to make this trip together." A pause. He'd been planning it for 2 years. He had this idea about Montana, about starting fresh. He used to say the mountains didn't know your history. You could just be whoever you needed to be. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He wasn't wrong about that. No. She touched the doorframe lightly. He wasn't wrong about much. There was a grief in it that Ethan recognized as the specific grief of loving someone who made sense, who fit the shape of the world the way good things fit, and losing them before you were done needing them. He said, "There's water in the pitcher on the dresser. I'll heat something for supper." "You don't have to." "I eat supper every night," he said. "It's no more trouble to make it for two." She looked like she wanted to argue. Then she pressed her lips together and nodded. He left her to it. He made what he had: salt pork and beans, and cornbread that came out better than he expected, which was either good luck or the fact that he'd been paying more attention than usual. She came out of the bedroom for supper. She'd washed her face and rebraided her hair, and she sat at the table with her hands folded in her lap like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. He set food in front of her. She ate with the focused attention of someone who needed the calories and knew it without pretending she wasn't hungry. He respected that. They were mostly quiet. Outside, the night was coming in full, and the stars over the Montana mountains were extraordinary, the way they always were up here, more stars than sky. At some point she said, "The box." He looked up. "The cedar box. You asked what was in it." He waited. "My husband worked as a land surveyor." She said it carefully, like she was placing something fragile on the table between them. He found irregularities in some of the land grant documents coming out of the territorial office. False surveys, forged signatures. He was going to report it. Another pause. He got sick before he could. Ethan set down his fork. "And the people behind those documents," he said slowly. "They know about the box." Rose looked at him directly. Her eyes were very steady. "I believe that's why my wagon wheel broke," she said. "I don't believe it happened on its own." The room was very quiet. Ethan Cole had spent 3 years arranging his life so that nothing could reach him, so that nothing required him to stand between it and someone vulnerable. He had built those walls carefully, methodically, with the particular skill of a man who knows exactly how much he can afford to lose. He looked at the woman across the table from him, at her steady eyes and her exhausted face, and the shape of the future she was carrying into this world, despite everything. "Tell me everything," he said. She studied him for a moment. "You should know what you're getting into before—" "I said, tell me everything." Her chin lifted slightly, a small adjustment. "You're sure?" He looked at her. "Ma'am, if someone tampered with your wagon wheel on a trail in the Montana Territory while you were 7 months pregnant and alone, then I am very sure." Something moved through her expression then. Something that might have been the very first edge of trust, not full, not complete, but there. A crack of light under a door. "His name," she said quietly, "is Harlan Cross. He controls most of the land grant process in this county. If the papers in that box become public knowledge, then he loses everything." Ethan finished. "And he has nothing to lose," Rose said, "which makes him very dangerous." Ethan pushed back from the table. He stood and moved to the window and looked out at the dark Montana night, at the stars and the mountains, and the enormous quiet of the place he had chosen specifically because nothing could find him here. He thought about rules, about distance, about the clean, manageable smallness of a life with walls around it. Then he thought about a wagon wheel broken on a mountain trail and a woman on her hands and knees in the heat and the way she'd looked at him when she'd understood he wasn't going to leave. "You'll stay here," he said. "Not a question. Until we figure out what to do with what's in that box." Silence. Ethan. She had used his name. He'd told it to her on the trail somewhere between the first ridge and the second. "I brought trouble to your door." "Trouble was already here," he said. He didn't explain what he meant by that. "I just wasn't paying attention to it." He turned back from the window. "Get some sleep. We'll talk more in the morning." She didn't move right away. She sat at the table, looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between wariness and something softer that she hadn't quite allowed yet. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. It was the same question asked a different way. The same question she'd asked him on the trail when she'd looked at his hands and decided he wasn't a threat. And he gave her the same answer because it was the only honest one he had. "Because it's right," he said. Rose Calloway looked at him for one more long moment. Then she nodded and pushed herself carefully to her feet and walked back to the bedroom. Ethan stood at the window long after he heard the door close. Outside, the Montana night was enormous and very still. Somewhere in the dark, on a trail below the second ridge, there was a broken wagon with a cedar box full of papers that someone powerful wanted destroyed. And here inside this house that had been silent for 3 years, there was a woman sleeping in his mother's room, and the baby she was carrying, and whatever came next. Ethan Cole had not signed up for any of this. He stood at the window and looked at the stars, and he breathed, and he thought about walls and what they were really for, whether they kept danger out, or whether they just kept a man safely numb inside them. He didn't have the answer, but he stood at the window a long time, and he didn't sleep, and he kept watch over the dark trail below. Because someone had to. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. Ethan sat in the chair by the front window with his rifle across his knees and his eyes on the trail below, and the hours moved over him the way hours do when a man has too much to think about and not enough answers to think with. The stars shifted. The wind came down off the high peaks and moved through the grass in long, slow waves. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hunted. Somewhere in the house behind him, Rose Calloway slept in his mother's room, and the cedar box sat on the kitchen table, and everything he had spent 3 years building around himself felt suddenly very thin. He was not a man who made decisions quickly. He was not a man who made them slowly either. He made them the way he'd always made them, by sitting with a thing until it settled into its true shape, and then responding to what was actually there instead of what he wished was there. What was actually there was this: a pregnant widow with evidence of land fraud against a powerful man sleeping in his house 2 hours up a mountain trail from a broken wagon that someone had probably tampered with on purpose. That was the shape of it. He sat with it until first light came gray through the window, and Cutter moved in the pasture, and the day began to declare itself whether he was ready or not. Then he stood, set the rifle by the door, and started the fire for coffee. Rose was awake before the coffee was done. He heard her moving in the bedroom, careful, deliberate movement, the kind that told him the pain from the night before hadn't entirely released her. He didn't go to the hallway. He waited. He poured 2 cups when the coffee was ready and set one at her side of the table, because there was a her side of the table now, apparently, which was a thing he hadn't had in 3 years. She came out in a clean dress, pale yellow, this time her hair already braided. She looked better than she had the night before, which was not the same as looking rested, but it was something. She saw the coffee and stopped. "You didn't sleep," she said. He looked at her. "How do you know?" "You're wearing the same clothes." He almost said something about how that didn't prove anything. Then he decided it wasn't worth the effort. "I kept watch." She sat down slowly, both hands on the table, and looked at him with those steady dark eyes. "You kept watch because of what I told you last night?" "Yes." "Ethan." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "I didn't tell you that so you would—" "I know why you told me," he said. "And I kept watch because I decided to, not because you asked." She was quiet for a moment. He could see her deciding whether to push back on that. She had the look of a woman who was accustomed to pushing back. She didn't. She drank her coffee instead, and he recognized that too, the particular grace of someone who knows when to let a thing be. "The pains stopped," she said. "In the night. I don't think it's time." "Good. But they could start again." "I know." "If they do—" She stopped, started again. "I've helped at 2 births. I know what to do if there's time, but if it happens fast—" "I've helped bring livestock into the world for 20 years, he said. "I know it's not the same thing." She stared at him. "But the principle is similar enough," he said, "that you don't need to be afraid on that account." She kept staring. Then, unexpectedly, a short sound escaped her, Not quite a laugh, more like the ghost of one surprised out of her before she could stop it. "You're a very strange man," she said. "So I've been told." She shook her head slowly. Then she looked at the cedar box on the table. The ease that had briefly flickered between them went out of her face, and she became again the woman who was carrying something heavy. "I need to tell you the rest of it," she said. "I figured." She set down her cup. "William, my husband, he started noticing inconsistencies in the surveys about 8 months before he died. Parcels that appeared on the official maps but didn't match the physical land. Boundaries that had been quietly shifted. He thought at first it was clerical error." She paused. "Then he found a name on 3 of the documents that shouldn't have been there. A man who'd been dead for 2 years. Someone was using that name to sign off on surveys. Someone with access to the Territorial Land Office." Ethan said nothing. He watched her face. He spent 4 months gathering documentation. Everything in that box surveys correspondences, signed affidavits from 2 homesteaders who'd been pushed off land they'd legally claimed. He was going to take it to the Federal Land Office in Helena. She stopped. "He got sick in April. Fever. It moved fast." Her voice stayed level throughout all of this. It was the levelness of someone who had told a fact so many times in their own head that it had become a fact and nothing more, at least while they were telling it. "He died in 3 weeks. And the box," Ethan said. "He told me about it 2 days before he died. He made me promise to get it to Helena." Her jaw tightened. "I intended to go directly, but there were things to settle. The house to close, funds to arrange. It took longer than I expected, and I think someone started watching me. Someone connected to Harlan Cross." "You think the accident yesterday was Cross's doing?" "I think someone loosened the wheel pin," she said quietly. "It was holding fine for 2 days of travel. That kind of failure, it doesn't happen that way on its own. Not usually." Ethan turned this over. "Cross would need someone on the road, someone watching the main trail." "He has men," Rose said. "William mentioned that. Cross keeps men on retainer, not outlaws exactly, more like hired hands who don't ask questions about what kind of work they're doing." Ethan stood and moved to the window. He looked at the trail below. The morning light was full now, and the meadow grass was gold and still. Nothing moved on the trail. That didn't mean nothing was there. "If they found the wagon," he said, "they found it empty. The box is gone. They'll know someone came along." "Yes." "Which means they'll start working outward from that point on the trail. Asking questions. Looking for anyone who came through that stretch of road yesterday afternoon." "Yes," Rose said again. "And this is the only working ranch within 2 hours of that location." The silence that followed was neither of them saying the obvious thing, which was that Harlan Cross's men would be here by tomorrow at the latest. Maybe sooner. Ethan turned back from the window. "How certain are you about the Federal Land Office, that they'd act on what's in that box?" "William believed they would," she said. "There are affidavits from 2 men. There are forged documents with provable forgeries. He was very thorough. And the man whose name is being used, the dead man, his family is still living. William had a letter from the widow confirming her husband never signed any surveys in the last 2 years of his life." She looked directly at him. "If the right person in Helena sees that box, Harlan Cross loses everything. His land holdings, his contracts, his standing with the territorial government. Everything. Which is why he's willing to tamper with a pregnant woman's wagon wheel on a mountain trail," Ethan said flatly. Something crossed Rose's face, then something raw and brief that she shut down almost immediately. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, at the set of her shoulders, at the hands around the coffee cup that were not quite steady. "You're not scared," he said. It was an observation, not a compliment. "I am terrified," she said. "I'm just not going to let it stop me." Ethan Cole had known men who said things like that and didn't mean them. He had known maybe 2 or 3 who meant them exactly as stated. He believed she meant it exactly as stated. "All right," he said. Here's what I'm going to do. What he was going to do was ride down to the Brannigan place, his nearest neighbors 4 miles south, and send word through them to a man named Aldous Graves, who was a federal deputy marshal based out of Miles City. Ethan had done Aldous a good turn 2 years back, the details of which were not important, except that the man owed him, and more than that, the man was honest, which was rarer and more valuable than the debt. He explained this to Rose while he saddled his second horse, a steady gray named November, built for distance, and not much else, and she stood at the fence rail and listened. "You're trusting a debt," she said. "I'm trusting a man," he said. "The debt is just the reason he'll come fast." "How long?" "If the Brannigans get the message today, 2 days. Maybe 3. She was quiet, doing the arithmetic of that against whatever she knew about Harlan Cross's reach and speed. "And until then we stay put and don't make noise." He checked the cinch on November's saddle. "I need you to stay inside. Keep the box somewhere other than the kitchen table. And if anyone comes up the trail before I'm back, how will I know if they're Cross's men or just travelers? If they come up this trail," Ethan said, "they're not travelers. There's nothing at the end of this road except my ranch." That landed. He watched it land. "Keep the curtains drawn," he said. "There's a Winchester above the fireplace. You know how to use a rifle?" She raised an eyebrow. "My father was a farmer in Kansas," she said. "What do you think?" "I think yes," he said. "Correct." He swung up onto November and looked down at her. "I'll be back by midday. Lock the door behind me." "Ethan?" He stopped. She looked up at him. The morning light was on her face, and for a moment, just a moment, she looked exactly as tired and frightened as she actually was, with none of the careful composure she kept over it. "Be careful," she said. He nodded once. "Always am." He wasn't always careful, but it seemed like the thing to say, and he thought she probably knew that, and she nodded back, and he rode down the trail. He was gone 3 hours. 3 hours was long enough. He came back up the trail at a pace November didn't enjoy, but maintained because Ethan asked it of her, and he came through the gate and had his eyes on the house from 100 yards out, checking the curtains, the door, the small signs a man learns to read when he spent years watching for things that aren't right. Everything looked right. He exhaled. He put November in the pasture and walked to the house and knocked before he tried the door, because it was a locked door now, and he'd told her to lock it, and there was a woman with a rifle inside who didn't need to be startled. The latch moved immediately. She'd been near the door. She pulled it open and looked at him. He could see she'd been running her own kind of watch from inside the particular tightness around a person's eyes when they've been alert for hours. "The Brannigans will send the message," he said. "Their boy is riding to Miles City today." She stepped back to let him in. "Anyone on the trail?" "No." He took off his hat. "But I found something at the wagon." She went still. He reached into his coat and produced a piece of paper folded once creased sharp, the kind of note someone leaves when they want it found. He'd found it tucked into the broken wheel hub, which meant someone had been back to the wagon after he'd taken Rose and her things away. "Someone knew the wagon," he said, "or knew to check it." Rose unfolded the paper. He watched her read it. Her face didn't change, not the way most people's faces change when they're frightened. Hers went very still in a different way, the way still water goes still when something is moving underneath it. She handed it back. He read it. It said, "Give us what the surveyor left and go back to Missouri. No one needs to know you were ever here. No name, no signature." "Missouri," he said. "That's where we came from," she said quietly. "They know where you're from. They know what you're carrying." He set the note on the table and looked at it. "And they know you're somewhere on this mountain." For the first time since he'd found her on the trail, Rose Calloway sat down without being ready to stand back up again. She sat in the kitchen chair and pressed both hands to her face, and he stood across the room and gave her the space to do it, because he understood that some moments needed a little room around them. "I'm sorry," she said into her hands. "I brought this here. I brought this to you. Rose. He said her name quietly, and she lowered her hands. Stop apologizing for being in danger. The people who made you dangerous are the ones doing the apologizing in this scenario. She blinked at him. Something in that blinked the grammar of it maybe seemed to catch her off guard. I mean it, he said. You didn't ask for any of this. Neither did you. No. He agreed. But I'm the one who decided to stop on that trail. That was my choice. He picked up the note and looked at it again. And I'm not changing my mind about it. She watched him for a long moment. Why not? She said. Genuinely. Not because it's right. Why? He thought about that honestly. He looked at the note. He looked at the cedar box on the shelf where she'd moved it behind the row of books his mother had left here. He thought about 3 years of silence and walls and the efficient management of a life that didn't ask him to care about anything. Because I forgot, he said slowly, that protecting someone is different from losing them. He paused. I confused the two for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Your wife, Rose said gently. He looked at her. I'm not prying, she said. You don't have to explain. Her name was Margaret, he said. She died in a ranch fire 3 years ago. I was in the north pasture. By the time He stopped, started again. Our son was inside. Rose closed her eyes briefly. I built this place up here because I thought distance was the same as safety, he said. Turns out, it's just distance. She didn't fill the silence with condolences. He was grateful for that. She just let it be what it was, the way he'd let her grief be what it was, on the trail the day before. William used to say, grief was a room you had to live in before you could move through it, she said finally. I thought that was a very unhelpful thing to say when he said it. She looked at the box on the shelf. I understand it better now. Ethan sat down at the table across from her. First time he'd sat across from another person at this table in 3 years. It felt strange, not bad, just strange. Tell me about him, he said. William. She looked surprised. Why? Because you're carrying something that belonged to him and you're risking your life for it and your baby's life, he said. I'd like to know the kind of man that was worth that. Something moved through her face, unexpected, unguarded. Like a window opening in a wall. And she told him. She talked for an hour. He listened the way he listened to things fully and without interruption. And she told him about William Calloway, who had been a surveyor and a reader of books, and a man who believed perhaps too earnestly for his own good that the law was a thing worth holding to, who had grown up in St. Louis and found the West on a map and never quite recovered from the discovery, who had made Rose laugh on their first meeting by confidently mispronouncing 3 consecutive words in a conversation about cattle, and then absolutely refusing to be embarrassed about it. She told him about the daughter they'd lost, Eleanor. They'd named her Eleanor Marie, and the 4 days of her life, and the way William had held her without stopping, as though if he held her hard enough and long enough, he could keep her. She told him how he'd looked when the fever took him, how she'd sat beside him and read aloud from the book of maps he loved so that the last thing he heard was the names of places he'd always wanted to go. Ethan listened to all of it. When she was done, the kitchen was afternoon lit and quiet, and Rose looked lighter, not less sad, but lighter. The kind of lightness that comes from setting something down briefly. He sounds like a good man, Ethan said. He was, she said. Not perfect. He was stubborn and sometimes he forgot to eat, and he was terrible at remembering dates. She smiled small and true. But he was good. He wanted good things for the right reasons. That's rarer than people think, Ethan said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I'm finding that out. The moment held between them for just a second longer than ease would account for. Then she looked away, and he looked at the window, and the afternoon went on. I should check the horses, he said, standing. "Ethan?" She said his name the same way she had on the trail. He stopped. "Thank you for asking about him. Most people don't ask, they just—" She made a small gesture. "They act like talking about him will make it worse." "Does it?" he asked. "No," she said. "It makes him real again for a minute." He nodded. He understood that exactly. He went to check the horses. He was in the barn when he heard it. Not a loud sound. Not a sound that would alarm a person who wasn't already listening for things that didn't fit. A single, sharp sound from the tree line at the north edge of the pasture, the sound of something stepping on dead wood. Ethan didn't move fast. He moved exactly the way he always moved, which was with purpose and without waste, and he came around the side of the barn with his hand on his revolver and his eyes on the tree line. 2 men on horseback. They were still in the trees. Not moving yet. Just watching the ranch. He didn't draw. Drawing was a statement. He wasn't ready to make that statement yet. He kept his hand where it was and looked at them directly, letting them know he'd seen them, letting them decide what that meant. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one of them turned his horse and moved back into the trees. The other followed. They were gone in 30 seconds, as quiet as they'd come. Ethan stood in the pasture a long time after they disappeared. The afternoon was utterly still. Not peaceful. Just still the way a room goes still when someone has just left it. He went back to the house. Rose was at the window. She'd seen them. 2, she said when he came through the door. 2, he confirmed. "They're not Cross's main men," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. "Too obvious, too far back. Those are scouts, the kind of men you send to confirm a location before you send the men you actually want to use." She absorbed this without flinching. "How long before the others come?" "Could be tonight," he said. "More likely tomorrow." "And Marshal Graves can't be here before then." "No." She turned from the window. Her chin was up. Her eyes were level. She pressed one hand briefly to the side of her stomach, the gesture so automatic he understood it had nothing to do with pain, and then she straightened. "Then tell me what to do," she said, "and I'll do it." He looked at her standing there, tired and pregnant and afraid and absolutely prepared to fight, and something in his chest did the thing it had done when he'd first heard her voice on the trail. Something old. Something he'd thought was finished. "First thing," he said, "we move the box." She nodded. "There's a loose board under the bedroom floor. Second one from the left past the threshold. Nobody finds that who doesn't already know it's there." "All right." "Second thing." He moved to the fireplace and took the Winchester down. He checked the load with quick, practiced hands, then held it out to her. "You sleep with this tonight." She took it without hesitation, held it with the easy familiarity of someone who actually knew what she was holding. "Third thing," he said. She waited. "Try to eat something," he said. "You haven't eaten since breakfast, and you're doing enough work keeping that baby safe without running on empty." She stared at him. He stared back. "That's your third tactical priority," she said slowly. "Supper." "It's not tactical," he said. "It's practical." A long pause. "You are," she said again, quieter this time, with something in it he hadn't heard the first time she'd said it, "a very strange man, Ethan Cole." "So I've been told," he said, and went to cook supper. She helped despite his clear intention that she would not. She sat at the table and sliced cornbread with the focused efficiency of someone who spent the first 25 years of their life in a kitchen where you helped, or you went hungry, and she talked while she did it, not about Cross, not about the men in the tree line, not about the box under the bedroom floor. She talked about her sister in Billings, who was named Harriet, and who was apparently a force of nature in the specific way that certain Kansas women became forces of nature, which Ethan gathered had something to do with the particular combination of prairie weather and personal stubbornness. He cooked and listened, and didn't say much. But the kitchen was warm and the food was good, and the evening came on outside, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Somewhere between the cornbread and the sound of the wind in the eaves, the house felt different than it had that morning. Felt less like the quiet structure a man builds around his grief. Felt more like a house. He didn't remark on it, but he noticed. After supper, she took the box to the bedroom and put it under the floor the way he'd shown her, and he checked the latches on every window and moved the chairs back from the walls and made the small, practiced adjustments that a man makes to a space when he's preparing it to be defended rather than lived in. She watched him do it from the doorway of the hallway. "You've done this before," she said. "Once or twice." "Since Margaret." He paused at the parlor window. "Before," he said. "I wasn't always a rancher." She let that sit for a moment. "What were you before?" He looked at her. "Army Scout, 4 years. Then Pinkerton briefly, which I didn't take to. Then I came out here and built something that was mine." He moved to the next window. "Didn't think I'd need the old skills again." "Do you mind," she said, "that you need them now?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said to his own mild surprise. "Not particularly." She nodded slowly. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Rose." She went to the bedroom. The door didn't close all the way, left an inch of space, he noticed, so she could hear the front of the house. He set the chair back by the front window, rifle on his knees. Outside, the Montana night was enormous and dark and completely without sound. He watched it the way a man watches something he doesn't entirely trust. And somewhere past midnight, when the silence had gone on long enough that a less experienced man might have been lulled by it, Ethan Cole heard hoofbeats, not 2 horses, more, coming up the trail at a pace that didn't bother with quiet. He was on his feet and at the bedroom door in 4 steps. "Rose," he said. She was already awake. He could see the Winchester in her hands. "I heard," she said. He looked at her in the dark. At this woman he had known for less than 24 hours who was holding a rifle and meeting his eyes without flinching. And he thought briefly with the part of his mind that was not already running calculations about sightlines and approaches, and how many men made that kind of sound on a mountain trail that William Calloway had been right about one thing. He'd chosen well. "Stay in the room," Ethan said, "unless they get past me." "If they get past you." "They won't," he said, "but if they do, you protect that baby." She held his gaze for one hard second. "Don't let them get past you," she said. He turned back to the front of the house. The hoofbeats were getting closer. There were 4 of them. Ethan knew it before they reached the gate. He could count horses by sound. It was a skill that had kept him alive twice during his Pinkerton years, and once in a canyon outside of Bozeman he didn't like to think about. 4 horses, 3 moving with the easy rhythm of men who did this kind of work regularly, one moving a little slower, a little heavier. That one was carrying someone who didn't ride for a living. That one he suspected was Harlan Cross. He didn't open the door. He moved to the side window instead, the one that gave him an angle on the approach without putting him square in front of the door frame, which was the kind of thing a man learned to think about when people were coming to his house at midnight with unclear intentions and clear numbers. They stopped at the gate. For a long moment, nothing. Just the sound of horses breathing and the creak of saddle leather. Then a voice, smooth, unhurried, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. "Mr. Cole, I know you're awake." Ethan said nothing. "My name is Harlan Cross. I'm a businessman with land holdings in Custer and Yellowstone counties. I'm not here to cause trouble." A pause waited with the particular patience of someone who uses patience the way other men use threats. "I'm here because I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ethan moved to the front window. Careful. Staying low, staying to the side of the frame. He could see them now in the pale moonlight. 4 riders at the gate, like the man had said. The one slightly ahead of the others was broad-shouldered, well-dressed, even at this hour, sitting his horse like a man who'd paid someone a great deal of money to teach him how. That would be Cross. The 3 behind him were not well-dressed. They had the look of men who were paid to be wherever they were told to be. One of them had his hand on his rifle. "Nothing here belongs to you," Ethan said through the window. Loud enough to carry, calm enough to mean it. A brief silence. Then, Mr. Cole, I appreciate plain speaking. Let me be equally plain. There is a woman staying in your house. She is carrying documentation that was taken from its rightful owner, that owner being myself. Now I have no quarrel with you. You seem like a reasonable man. If you send the woman out with the box, we'll be on our way before sunrise, and your name never comes up in any of this. The woman, Ethan said, is a guest on my property. She is a widow carrying stolen property. She is a pregnant woman whose wagon wheel was tampered with on a public trail, Ethan said. And I'd be real careful about what you say next, Mr. Cross, because I have a good memory and I remember everything. The silence this time was different, tighter. When Cross spoke again, the smoothness had developed a slight edge. Just slight. The kind of edge that a man tries to keep covered because he knows what it looks like when it shows. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. No, Ethan said. You made it complicated when you sent men to tamper with a pregnant woman's wagon. I'm just dealing with what you made. He heard one of the men behind Cross shift in his saddle. Heard the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. Ethan's voice didn't change. If that man fires, he will not get a second chance. And the rest of you will spend the night explaining to the territorial authorities why you rode to a private ranch at midnight and discharged a weapon. I've already sent word to a federal deputy marshal. He is on his way. Whatever happens here tonight will be examined in detail. Another silence. He watched Cross's posture, the set of the shoulders, the small adjustments a man's body makes when he's recalculating. You're bluffing about the marshal, Cross said. Ask me again when he gets here, Ethan said. I'll be right inside. He stepped back from the window. He heard low voices at the gate cross and his men conferring. He couldn't make out words, only the rhythm of disagreement. Someone pushing back. Then hoofbeats, moving away. He stayed where he was for another full minute, listening to the sound diminish, counting in his head, tracking the direction. They weren't circling. They were actually leaving, for tonight. He exhaled. He went to the bedroom door. They're gone, he said. Rose was on her feet in the dark Winchester at her shoulder, already lowering it as he spoke. Her eyes were absolutely steady. Cross himself came, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd been listening through the wall. Yes. He doesn't send himself, she said. William told me that. He said Cross was a man who kept his hands clean. She set the rifle against the wall. One hand went to her side, that automatic gesture again. He must be more worried about what's in that box than I realized. Ethan stepped into the doorway. How long has he known William was gathering evidence? I don't know exactly. She sat on the edge of the bed. The composure she'd been holding started to show its edges, not break, just show. Like watching good timber begin to flex under more weight than it was built for. Long enough. William said he started being followed 2 months before he got sick. And after William died. 3 weeks after someone broke into our house in Missouri. Her voice stayed even. They were neat about it. Tried to make it look like nothing had been disturbed. But I knew my own home. She pressed her lips together. That's when I knew I had to leave. You should have gone straight to Helena, he said. Without judgment. Just the fact of it. I know that now, she said. I thought moving carefully would be safer than moving fast. I was trying to protect the baby. Her jaw tightened. I was wrong. You're here, he said. Boxes under the floor. Marshall's coming. She looked up at him. They'll come back. Tomorrow night, he said. Maybe sooner if Cross decides patience isn't working. What do we do? Ethan leaned against the doorframe. He turned the situation in his mind the way he turned things looking at it from each side, accounting for weight and balance. We don't wait for them to choose the time, he said. She watched him. I need you to trust me on the next part, he said. I do trust you, she said. The words came out quickly. Then she seemed to hear herself, and something moved through her expression. Surprise, maybe at her own certainty. I don't entirely know why, but I do. All right, he said. Get some sleep. I mean it this time. I need you rested for tomorrow. She looked like she wanted to argue. She was very good at looking like she wanted to argue. Ethan, she said. Rose. If something happens, nothing's happening tonight. They're gone. But if... She stopped, looked at her hands. There's a letter in the box, addressed to Harriet, my sister. If something happens to me, I need someone to... I'll see that she gets it, he said. Quiet. Absolute. She looked up at him. He watched the thing she was holding together hold together, and he understood exactly how much effort that was taking. Thank you, she said. So softly, it was barely sound. He nodded once, pulled the door mostly closed, went back to his chair. The Montana night outside was empty again, or seemed empty, which wasn't the same thing at all. He knew that. He sat with his rifle and his coffee, and the knowledge of what morning was going to require, and he thought about what it meant that Harlan Cross had come himself. It meant the man was scared. Good. Scared men made mistakes. He had a plan by the time the first gray light came through the window. It wasn't a perfect plan. Perfect plans required resources he didn't have and time he didn't have, and the assumption that nothing would go sideways, which was an assumption he'd learned not to make since approximately the age of 22. But it was a real plan built from what he actually had, which was the terrain, the element of surprise. One good horse, one woman with a rifle, who he'd now seen under pressure twice, and who hadn't broken either time, and a federal deputy marshal who should be arriving within 24 hours. The question was what Cross would do in that 24 hours. Cross had come himself last night because he wanted the box returned quietly. No record, no official involvement. A simple exchange, give it back, disappear, no one talks about it. He'd expected a ranch hand who'd taken in a stray and could be frightened or bought off. Instead, he'd found something else. Now he knew he couldn't buy it, and he'd have to calculate whether he could afford to frighten it. And when he finished that calculation, he'd come back with more men and a different approach. Ethan needed to change the board before that calculation was finished. He went to the bedroom door and knocked at first light. Rose answered it almost immediately. She hadn't slept much either, he guessed. She was dressed and her hair was done and the Winchester was in her hand. I need to borrow a page from the box, he said. She studied him. Why? I need Cross to believe I'm willing to negotiate. I need him to meet me somewhere specific. A pause. You're going to draw him away from the ranch. I need him away from his men, or most of them. He looked at her directly. He'll bring someone. Always does with men like him. But if I can get him to meet me at the lower meadow down near the cottonwoods where I found you, he won't bring all four. Too obvious for a negotiation. He'll bring one, maybe two. And at the lower meadow you have the advantage, she said. I know that ground, he said. He doesn't. She was quiet for a moment, turning it over. And I stay here. You stay here, he said. Box under the floor. Winchester in your hands. If anyone comes to this door who isn't me, you don't open it. What if it's Cross's men? The house is built from 6-inch pine, he said. You get to the back room and you stay low and you wait. Don't open the door for anyone until you hear my voice. And if your voice doesn't come, she asked. Direct. Unflinching. He looked at her. Then when morning comes and it's quiet, you take November from the pasture and you ride north. There's a town called Harker's Crossing, 12 miles. You go to the sheriff. Not the land office, the sheriff. You tell him a federal deputy marshal named Aldous Graves is en route, and he needs to meet him at this ranch. She absorbed all of this, nodded once. Page from the box, she said. Which one? One of the forged surveys, he said. I want Cross to believe I've looked through the box and I understand what I'm holding. That changes his calculation. She went to the bedroom floor without another word, lifted the board, and came back a moment later with a single folded survey document. She held it out to him. He took it. looked at it briefly, dense with figures and boundary descriptions. And there, in the bottom right corner, a signature he assumed belonged to a dead man. William was thorough, he said. He was, she said. And the pride in it was the specific pride of someone who loved a person, not despite their qualities, but because of them. He folded the paper and put it in his coat. I'm going to ride down and leave word at the trail junction. Cross has a man watching from the trees. He's been there since before dawn. He'd heard him at about 4 in the morning. One man, one horse holding position, watching. I'll make sure the message reaches Cross within the hour. And he'll come to the lower meadow. He'll come, Ethan said, because the alternative is coming here with force and leaving tracks that a federal marshal can follow. He doesn't want that. He wants this solved quietly. He checked his revolver, checked the second one, the smaller one he kept in his boot. I'm going to give him the belief that quiet is still possible. Is it? No? He said simply. But he doesn't know that yet. She watched him prepare with the focused attention of someone memorizing details. He noticed. I'll come back, he said. You don't know that. No? He agreed. But I intend to. That's not nothing. She pressed her lips together. For a moment, just a moment, he saw through all of it. The steadiness and the competence and the careful management of her own fear. He saw what was underneath it, which was a woman who had already lost one person she depended on and was standing at the particular edge where that can make a person either very closed or very honest. She was being very honest. Don't get killed, Ethan Cole, she said. Doing my best, he said. He left before she could say anything else. The man in the trees was younger than Ethan had expected, maybe 22, 23, with the uncertain posture of someone who was used to following orders and not entirely comfortable with the specific orders he was currently following. He had a rifle, but he hadn't raised it when Ethan rode directly toward him, which told Ethan the orders were to watch, not to engage. Ethan stopped November 10 feet away. The young man stared at him. You work for Cross, Ethan said. Not a question. A muscle in the young man's jaw worked. I don't know what your son, Ethan said. I've been tracking you since 4 in the morning. I know where you've been sitting. I know how many times you've shifted in that saddle, and I know you've got a signal whistle in your left coat pocket, because I could see the outline of it from 100 yards when the sun came up. He paused. I'm not your enemy. I want to give you a message for your employer. The young man stared. Tell Harlan Cross I'll meet him at the lower meadow, the cottonwood grove at the base of the Switchback Trail at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I have 1 page from the surveyor's documentation. I want to discuss terms. He held the young man's gaze. Can you remember all of that? A pause. Lower meadow, cottonwoods, 2 o'clock, 1 page, terms. That's right. Ethan turned November back toward the trail. Over his shoulder. Tell him to come with no more than 1 man. If I see more than 2 riders coming into that meadow, I'll know negotiation isn't what he's after, and I'll plan accordingly. He rode away without looking back. He was back at the ranch in 40 minutes. Rose had made coffee. She poured him a cup without being asked, and he took it, and they sat at the table, and he told her what he'd done. He'll honor the limit, she said slowly when he'd finished. 2 riders. Because he needs this to appear like a negotiation. For about 5 minutes, Ethan said. Then he'll try to take the page and find out where the rest of the box is. And then he'll find out that I'm a harder problem than he planned for. She set her cup down. I don't like this. I know. There are too many ways it goes wrong. I know that too. Ethan. She leaned forward slightly. What if I come with you? He looked at her. I'm not helpless, she said. And I know Cross's voice, I've heard it before. William had dealings with him early on before he understood what the man was. I know how he talks when he's deciding something. I'd know before you would if he's planning something. Rose. He said her name quiet and level. You are 8 months pregnant. You are not coming to a confrontation with a man who already tampered with your wagon. I can stay back. In the tree line. You'd never know I was there. I would absolutely know you were there, he said, because I would spend the entire conversation thinking about you being there, which means I'd be thinking about the wrong thing. He held her gaze. The best thing you can do for me today is be exactly where I know you are. She stared at him. Her jaw was tight. He watched her want to argue and decide against it. You're not wrong, she said finally. The admission clearly cost her something. I usually am wrong, he said. This is one of the other times. The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. The Brannigan boy should have reached Miles City by last night, he said. If Aldous rides hard, he could make it here by evening. If, she said. If, he agreed. And if he doesn't, then I deal with what's in front of me. She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her face, slow, careful, like watching ice begin to move in spring. You're not afraid of this, she said. Are you? It wasn't quite a question. He thought about how to answer it honestly. I'm careful, he said. That's not the same as afraid. No, she said. But most careful men are still afraid. I made my peace with certain things 3 years ago, he said. When you've already lost what you were most afraid of losing. A lot of other fears stop having teeth. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is that what happened? You lost the fear. I lost a lot of things, he said. The fear was one of them. I don't know if that's better or worse than the alternative. She reached across the table then, and he went very still because it was unexpected, and put her hand over his for just a moment. Not long, just long enough to mean it. It's better, she said. Right now for both of us, it's better. He looked at her hand on his. He didn't move. You're going to be fine today, she said. And then you're going to come back here, and this is going to be over. You don't know that, he said. Her own words back at her. No, she said, but I intend to believe it. That's not nothing. He looked up at her. Something moved through him that he didn't try to name because naming things made them real in ways that were sometimes more than a person could manage at once. She took her hand back, picked up her coffee. He let out a slow breath. I'm leaving at 1, he said. The rifle stays with you. Obviously, she said. He was at the cottonwoods by 1:45. He knew the spot well. He'd ridden past it 100 times, had watered his horses at the creek that ran beside it, in wetter years had sheltered there once during a lightning storm. He knew exactly where to stand to have the sun at his back and the tree cover on his left, and the creek bed dry now in the August heat, giving him a natural barrier on the right. Cross would have to come at him straight. No flanking without crossing open ground. He stood and waited. November was tied out of sight 50 yards back. At 2 o'clock exactly, he heard horses. 2 horses. He counted them. 2. He let himself exhale. They came out of the south end of the meadow cross, and one man, the same broad-shouldered, well-dressed Cross from last night, and beside him, a man who was built like he'd been assembled specifically for physical disagreement. Big hands, flat eyes. The kind of man you put next to you when you want to remind someone of their options. They stopped 20 feet away. Cross looked at him with the careful, assessing look of a man who'd spent 40 years reading people. Ethan let him look. Mr. Cole, Cross said. Mr. Cross. I appreciate the invitation. Cross's voice was warm in the way that some men's voices are professionally warm, the warmth sitting on top of the voice like a coat that doesn't quite fit. I hope we can settle this like reasonable men. That's the idea, Ethan said. You have something for me. Ethan reached into his coat and produced the folded survey. He held it up where Cross could see it, but he didn't offer it forward. Cross's eyes went to it immediately. He tried not to show how much they wanted to stay on it. He failed slightly. That is private property, Cross said. It's a survey document with a dead man's signature on it, Ethan said. Dated 8 months after that man died. I'd be real cautious about the word private. The warmth in Cross's voice developed more of that edge, still covered, less well. Where is the rest of it? Somewhere you won't find it, Ethan said. That's what I want you to understand this afternoon. The box is gone. What's in it has been copied, and those copies are already on their way to Helena. This page is the only piece that's still here, and I brought it so you could see what's coming for you." A silence. Cross's large companion shifted his weight forward. "Easy," Ethan said without looking at the man. "I'm talking to Mr. Cross." Cross raised one hand, a small gesture, the practiced gesture of a man who expected to be obeyed, and the large man stilled. "You're lying about the copies," Cross said. "The woman has been on this mountain for less than 2 days. She hasn't had time." "Are you certain enough of that to bet on it?" Ethan said. Silence. And there it was. The crack. Small. Just a hairline. But Ethan had been watching for it, and he saw it, and he understood what it meant. Cross wasn't certain. That was the entire point. That was the thing that 3 years of holding your losses up to the light teaches you, that most powerful men are terrified underneath the power, and all you have to do is find the specific thing they're most terrified of losing. For Harlan Cross, it was the certainty. Remove the certainty, and the rest of it started to shake. "Here's what I'm offering," Ethan said. "You ride away from this mountain, and you stay away. The widow and her child leave this territory safely. You spend the rest of your life managing the risk that somewhere in Helena there is documentation of what you've been doing. Maybe it surfaces, maybe it doesn't. But you'll know it exists." He paused. "The alternative is a federal marshal arrives tonight, and he is coming Mr. Cross whether you believe that or not, and everything in that box is entered into an official federal inquiry, and your name is on every page of it." The meadow was very still. Cross looked at him for a long, careful moment. Ethan watched the calculation happening behind those careful eyes. He watched the man weigh his options, the way powerful men weigh things not by what was right, but by what the cost of each direction looked like. "You'd let me walk away," Cross said slowly. "I'd let you ride away," Ethan said. "Today. Right now. And nothing more happens on this mountain." Another silence. Then Cross said very quietly, "And if I don't? Then I tie you to that saddle," Ethan said, "and I walk you into Miles City myself, and Deputy Marshal Aldous Graves processes you in the morning." The large man moved. He was faster than Ethan had expected for someone built that way, and he had his rifle up before Ethan had fully registered the motion. But Ethan was already moving. He went left and low, below the line of the shot, and the rifle went off above him, the sound enormous in the meadow air, and he came up inside the man's reach before he could lever a second round. He hit him once hard with the flat of his revolver across the forearm, and heard something crack, and the rifle dropped. The large man hit the ground on his knees. Ethan turned. Cross had not moved. He sat his horse and watched Ethan come back upright with his revolver out, and there was something in Cross's face now that hadn't been there before. Not the warmth, not the edge underneath it. Something flat and cold. Fear. "Get down," Ethan said. Cross looked at the revolver. Looked at his man on the ground cradling his arm. Looked back at Ethan. Very slowly, he got down from his horse. "Hands where I can see them," Ethan said. Cross put his hands up. His face was absolutely controlled now, all the warmth gone, the edge gone, just the bare calculation underneath it. "You understand what you're doing," he said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Do you—" Cross said nothing. Ethan pulled the length of rope from his belt. He'd come prepared for this, because this was always where it was going to end, regardless of what Cross agreed to, and he tied the man's hands in front of him, with the quick efficiency of someone who'd done it before. Then he did the large man's hands, which was more difficult, given the broken arm, and the man made sounds through his teeth that Ethan ignored. "You're going to sit right here," Ethan said, "while we wait for Marshal Graves." "You can't hold us here," Cross said. "I'm going to try real hard," Ethan said. "You have no authority." "I have a rope and a revolver," Ethan said. "That's sufficient for the next few hours." Cross's jaw tightened. "My other men." "Are 2 men," Ethan said. "Against a federal deputy marshal and a rancher on his own property. The math doesn't work in your favor." Silence. Then from the direction of the South Trail, Ethan heard hoofbeats again. His hand tightened on the revolver. But these hoofbeats were different, faster, more direct, not the careful approach of men trying to come in quiet. These were the hoofbeats of someone who was not trying to hide their approach at all. He heard his name, a voice he hadn't heard in 2 years calling his name from a quarter-mile down the trail. Aldous Graves. A day early. Ethan's eyes closed for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them and looked at Harlan Cross. "Early," he said. Cross said nothing. But something in his face went out very quietly, like a lamp running down. The calculation that had been running behind his eyes since the meadow, all of it stopped. He looked for the first time like a man who understood that the thing he'd been trying to avoid had arrived. Ethan raised his voice. "South Trail," he called. "Meadow by the cottonwoods." Hoofbeats adjusted direction. He kept the revolver on Cross and waited. He thought about Rose in the house. He thought about the cedar box under the bedroom floor. He thought about the letter addressed to Harriet that he had promised to deliver and now probably wouldn't need to. He thought about a woman sitting at his kitchen table telling him about a man named William who believed the law was worth holding to. He was holding it right now. It was heavy. He didn't mind. Aldous Graves came into the meadow on a blood bay horse he'd clearly been pushing hard because the animal was lathered, and Aldous himself looked like he'd been in the saddle for most of the last 20 hours. He was a lean, weathered man in his mid-40s with a federal badge on his coat, and the specific tired alertness of someone who ran on duty and not much else. He took in the scene, Ethan, the revolver, the 2 bound men in about 4 seconds. His expression did not change significantly. "Ethan," he said. "Aldous," Ethan said. Aldous looked at Cross, at the large man with the broken arm, back at Ethan. "You want to tell me what I rode 20 hours for?" "Land fraud," Ethan said. "Forged surveys. Tampering with a witness. Threatening a pregnant widow on a public trail." He lowered the revolver. "I've got documentation under my bedroom floor and a witness in my house." Aldous looked at Cross for a long moment. Cross looked back with the expression of a man who was already composing different versions of the story. "Harlan Cross," Aldous said slowly. "I've heard that name." "You'll be hearing it more," Ethan said. Aldous swung down from his horse. He walked across with the unhurried walk of a man who'd been doing this long enough that urgency had become a thing he no longer needed to perform. "Mr. Cross," he said, "I'm Deputy Marshal Aldous Graves out of Miles City. You're going to answer some questions." Cross said nothing. Aldous looked back at Ethan. "You're sure about the documentation?" "Box full of it," Ethan said. "William Calloway spent months gathering it before he died. His widow carried it across 300 miles to make sure it got to the right hands." "Where's the widow now?" "My ranch," Ethan said. 2 hours up the mountain." Aldous nodded. "Then let's go talk to her." Ethan picked up November's reins. He looked at Cross once more, at this man who had tampered with a pregnant woman's wagon and ridden up to a private ranch at midnight and tried to buy his way out of what he'd built, and who was now sitting in a dry meadow in Montana with his hands tied and a federal marshal reading him his rights. Cross met his eyes. There was no warmth left, no edge. Just the cold, still look of a man who had calculated wrong and knew it. "Her husband believed the law was worth something," Ethan said. "Turns out he was right." He turned November toward the mountain trail and started back. The sun was moving west, throwing long shadows through the cottonwoods, and somewhere up the mountain, a woman was waiting with a rifle and a cedar box, and enough courage for 3 people. He rode faster than he needed to. He wanted her to stop worrying. He heard her before he saw her. She was on the porch when he came up the last stretch of trail. He could hear the door open before he'd cleared the final bend, which meant she'd been listening for hoofbeats for the last 2 hours, and her ears were sharper than he'd given her credit for. He came around into view, and she was standing at the top of the porch steps with the Winchester at her side, and her eyes going immediately past him to count the riders behind him. Him. Aldous. 2 bound men on horses that Aldous was leading. He watched her do this count, watched her understand it. She sat down on the porch step. Not collapsed, she chose it the way a person chooses to sit when their legs have been holding them up through willpower alone, and the willpower has just been released. She sat down and pressed one hand to her sternum and breathed. Ethan stepped down from November before he'd fully stopped the horse. He crossed the yard in 8 steps and stood at the bottom of the porch stairs and looked up at her. "You're all right," she said. Her voice came out lower than usual. "I'm all right." She looked at his face, looking for the thing that would tell her he was lying. She didn't find it because he wasn't. "Cross," she said. "Behind me. Aldous has him." He looked at her directly. "It's done, Rose." She pressed her lips together hard. Her eyes went bright in the way eyes do when a person is holding something back that very much wants out. She held it. She was good at holding things. "The baby," he said. "Fine," she said. "Quiet all afternoon." She exhaled slowly. I think she knew to wait. He noticed she'd said she. He didn't comment on it, but he noticed. Aldous rode up behind him, and the practical requirements of the moment took over. Horses to be dealt with, bound men to be managed, statements to be given. Aldous was professional and methodical, and he asked his questions the way a man asks questions when he's been doing this long enough that he doesn't need to perform the authority anymore. He had a small leather notebook, and he wrote in it with a stub of pencil, and he didn't editorialize, and he didn't rush. Rose gave her statement sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and she was thorough and precise, and Aldous looked at her twice with the expression of a man recalibrating his initial assessment of a witness. "Mrs. Calloway," he said when she'd finished, "your husband gathered a significant amount of documentation." "He was a surveyor," she said. "He understood what made evidence." "He did," Aldous agreed. He looked at the cedar box now, open on the table, the pages arranged in the order William had organized them. "This is going to take some time to process through the federal office. I want to be honest with you about that. Land fraud cases, especially ones involving territorial officials, they move slow." "I understand that," Rose said. "But they do move," Aldous said. "And what's in this box?" He looked at the papers again. "Your husband built a strong case, ma'am. I've seen federal inquiries opened on less than half this." Something crossed Rose's face then. Grief and pride knotted together into an expression that Ethan didn't think there was a word for. "He'd want to know it was enough," she said quietly. "It's enough," Aldous said. She nodded once, looked down at her coffee, held herself together with the particular discipline that Ethan had been watching her exercise for 2 days, and which he was increasingly certain had been the thing keeping her functional for the past 4 months. "What happens to Cross?" Ethan said. Aldous leaned back in his chair. "Tonight, he stays where you've got him, assuming you're willing to let me use your barn." "Use whatever you need," Ethan said. "I'll take him and his man into Miles City tomorrow. File the initial complaint with the territorial court. The federal inquiry will be referred out of Helena, but that process starts the minute I ride in with a statement and this box." He closed the cedar lid. "His land holdings get frozen pending investigation. His contracts under review. His access to the territorial land office suspended." A pause. "He won't be touching anyone else's wagon wheels for a long time." Rose looked at Ethan across the table. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. There wasn't anything to say that the look didn't already cover. "I'll need you both in Miles City at some point," Aldous said, "for formal statements. Not immediately, I know you've got—" He glanced at Rose with the slightly uncomfortable expression that men of a certain generation produced when confronted with visible pregnancy. "Considerations. But within the month if you can manage it." "We'll manage it," Ethan said. Rose looked at him when he said we. He didn't look away. "All right then," Aldous said, standing. "I'll take my prisoners to the barn and let you good people have your evening." He picked up the cedar box. "I'll need to take this with me." Rose's hand moved toward it involuntarily. Then she stopped herself. "It's all right," Aldous said, not unkindly. "It'll be in official custody, safer than anywhere else it could be." She nodded, let her hand rest on the table instead. Aldous picked up his hat, nodded to both of them, and went out. The kitchen was suddenly very quiet. Outside, they could hear Aldous talking to his prisoners, his voice professional and without heat. Inside, the fire had burned to coals, and the coffee was cold, and the cedar box was gone from the table where it had been sitting since the night before. Rose looked at the place where it had been. "It's over," Ethan said. "It's over," she agreed. Her voice was strange, hollowed out slightly, the way voices get when the thing a person has been braced against stops pushing and there's nothing left to push back with. He would have... She stopped, tried again. He would have been very calm about all of this, she said. That was the thing about him. He believed it would work out because he believed in the mechanisms. The law, the process, the right people doing the right thing. She looked up. I wanted to believe it too. I just couldn't quite get there. You didn't have to believe it would work out, Ethan said. You just had to keep moving. She looked at him. Is that what you've been doing 3 years up this mountain? He was quiet for a moment. Keeping moving is probably generous, he said. I've been keeping still mostly, which is a different thing. Is it still keeping still? She said. Now. He looked at the table, at the 2 coffee cups, at the absence of the cedar box and the presence of everything else that had accumulated in this kitchen in the past 48 hours. No, he said. I don't think it is. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood slowly, with the careful movement that had become familiar to him, the constant small negotiation with her own body that she conducted without complaint. I need to sleep, she said. Actually, sleep. For the first time in... She stopped counting. A long time. Go, he said. She moved toward the hallway. At the threshold, she stopped. Ethan. He looked up. She was standing in the doorway with one hand on the frame, and she looked at him with an expression that was entirely unguarded, in a way he hadn't seen from her yet. No composure over it, no careful management. Just the thing itself. I'm glad you stopped on that trail, she said. He held that for a moment. So am I, he said. She nodded once, went to bed. He sat at the table a long time after she left, and the house was quiet around him. And for the first time in 3 years, the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like something waiting. He didn't know exactly what, but he sat with it, and he breathed, and he let himself not know for a while. She went into labor at 4 a.m. He heard her through the wall, a sound she tried to muffle, and didn't entirely succeed at the kind of sound a person makes when pain arrives larger than expected. He was up and at her door in seconds. Rose. A pause. Then, I'm fine. You're not fine, he said. Open the door or I'm opening it. Another pause, shorter. Then the latch moved. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. Her face was very white and very set. She was holding the bedpost with one hand. It started about an hour ago, she said. I thought it might stop again. He crossed to her immediately, crouched down to her level, looked at her face the way he'd looked at it on the trail, reading the color, the set of the jaw, what the eyes were doing. It's not stopping, he said. No, she admitted. It's not. He stood. How far apart? 5 minutes, maybe less. His mind went to the practical immediately, because panic was a thing he'd trained out of himself in circumstances considerably less manageable than this, and because the practical was what she needed right now. I need water heated, he said. Clean linens, there are some in the chest at the top of the hall. And I need you to tell me right now if there's anything about this that's different from your daughter's birth. She looked up at him sharply. Why? Because different means, I need to know things I'm not expecting, he said. Same means we do this the regular way. She held his gaze. Then, same, she said. This feels the same. Something moved behind her eyes, grief and fear, and something fiercer than both. Eleanor came fast, 2 hours from the first pain. He absorbed this. All right, he said. Here's what happens now. You stay comfortable. I get everything ready. You tell me when the pain changes. Ethan, I've got you, he said. He said it the way he said things, without performance, without reassurance that was bigger than the moment needed. Just the fact of it, level and clear. She exhaled, nodded. He went to work. He delivered calves and foals in worse conditions than this, in the cold, in the dark, in the field, with nothing but his hands and whatever was in his saddlebag. He knew the difference between a birth going right and a birth going wrong, and he knew what to do in the first case and what the limits of his capability were in the second. He was not a doctor. He knew that. He held that knowledge at the front of his mind as a boundary and worked efficiently within it. The water went on the fire. The linens came out of the chest. He moved the lamp to the bedside table, where it would do the most good, and took the extra quilt from the wardrobe and spread it across the foot of the bed. She watched him do all of this from the bed, breathing through contractions with the focused internal concentration of a woman who had done this before and was applying everything she'd learned. "You're good at this," she said during a pause between pains. "I'm competent," he said. "There's a difference." "Competent is exactly what I need right now," she said. He looked at her. She was pale and exhausted and more frightened than she was showing, and she was making small jokes, and he thought that was one of the braver things he'd seen in recent memory. "Tell me something," she said. Her way of managing time between contractions, he was starting to understand. Anything, just talk. He thought about what to tell her. He was not as established a man with a ready supply of conversation. "The first foal I ever delivered alone," he said, sitting beside the bed. "I was 19 years old. It was February. The mare had been in distress for 6 hours, and my father was down with influenza, and there was nobody else on the property." She was listening. Her eyes stayed on him. "I had read exactly one book about horse medicine," he said. "Once. When I was 14. I remembered approximately 1/3 of it." A pause. "The foal came out wrong-facing, which is about the worst thing that can happen in that situation, short of it not coming at all." "What did you do?" "I did what I remembered from the book, and I guessed at the rest, and I prayed considerably, which was unusual for me at the time." He looked at her steadily. "The foal made it. The mare made it. I did not sleep for 2 days afterward." Rose made a sound, pain and amusement overlapping. "That is not comforting." "No," he agreed. "But you said to talk, not to comfort." She laughed short, breathless, and then the pain took it from her, and she gripped the bedpost, and he put his hand over hers and held it until it passed. When it did, she was breathing hard. "Closer," she managed. "I know." He checked the water, nearly ready. "You're doing well." "I don't feel like I'm doing well." "That's how you know," he said. She looked at him sideways. "Is that wisdom?" "Observation," he said. "People who are actually struggling never feel like they're doing well. People who are managing fine always think they're struggling." He moved the lamp an inch. "You are managing this." She was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about Eleanor," she said. "I can't stop. Every time the pain comes, I think about her." He didn't tell her not to think about it. He didn't tell her this would be different. He didn't make promises that weren't his to make. "That makes sense," he said. "She was here. She mattered. You're allowed to think about her." Rose's breath caught in a way that wasn't the pain. "William used to say she was the bravest person he'd ever known," she said. 4 days old and she fought the whole time." A pause. "I used to think that was something people said. Now I think he was right." "He was right," Ethan said. She looked at him. "You never met her." "No," he said. "But I've met her mother." He held her gaze. The bravery comes from somewhere. The pain took her again. He held her hand and talked her through it, not with false reassurance, but with the specific, grounded running count of a person who had been watching the intervals and knew what they meant. "You're close," he said when it passed. "I know," she said through her teeth. "Ethan, I'm here. If something goes wrong, I'll handle it. But if something really..." "Rose." He waited until she looked at him. I am not going to let something happen to you. That is not a promise I make lightly. It is a promise I am making right now." She stared at him. Her face was stripped of everything except what was actually there underneath all of it: fear and exhaustion, and the fierce, stubborn life force of a woman who had survived 4 months alone, carrying more grief than most people carry in a decade. "Okay," she said, very quietly. "Okay," he said, and he was right, and things did not go wrong. And 2 hours later, just before dawn, just as the first gray light was beginning on the mountains, a sound came into the world that Ethan Cole had not heard in 3 years. A baby crying. A real cry. Strong and indignant and absolutely clear. He had that baby in his hands, wrapped safe, breathing, and he looked at her, and she was perfect, and he looked at Rose, and Rose was looking at him with the most complex expression he had ever seen on a human face. "Is she—" Rose started. "She's perfect," he said. His voice came out different than he expected. Rougher. He cleared his throat. "She's absolutely perfect." Rose reached for her, and he placed the baby in her arms with the particular care he reserved for things that mattered beyond his ability to articulate, and Rose held her daughter against her chest and closed her eyes and didn't say anything for a long time. He stepped back, gave them the room. He stood at the window and looked out at the coming morning, and he breathed, and he let the feeling in his chest be whatever it was going to be. It was large. That was the only word he had for it. It was large, and it pressed outward in every direction, and it had no specific name, but it was not grief, which was the feeling he was most accustomed to, and it was not relief, though it was partly that. It was something closer to being returned to himself. He didn't examine it too closely. He just let it be. Behind him, Rose said, "Come here." He turned. She was looking at him with the baby against her chest, and her face was exhausted and luminous in the way faces get in those first minutes, and she looked at him like he was someone she had always been intending to meet. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside the bed. The baby had settled. She was small and dark-haired, and she had the ancient solemn expression of someone who had just arrived from a great distance and was still forming opinions about the destination. "Hello?" Ethan said to her. Quiet, almost to himself. The baby blinked. Rose watched him. "She needs a name," Rose said. "That's yours to decide," he said. "I know." She looked down at her daughter. "I'd been thinking Margaret," she said carefully. "If it was a girl, for my grandmother." She looked up at him. "But I'm wondering if you might have thoughts on that particular name." He understood what she was asking. He held it for a moment, the weight of that name, what it cost him, what it meant that she'd asked instead of just telling him. "Margaret is a good name," he said. "My wife she'd have been glad to share it." Rose looked at him for a long moment. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She looked back at her daughter. "Margaret," she said softly. "Maggie." The baby made a sound, small, comfortable. The sound of someone deciding the destination was acceptable after all. Ethan sat in the chair beside the bed, and the morning came in through the window, and somewhere in the barn, Aldous Graves was preparing to take Harlan Cross into federal custody. And somewhere in Helena, a box of papers was about to change the shape of land law in the Montana Territory. And somewhere, a man named William Calloway had spent his last weeks building something that turned out to matter. And here in a spare room in a mountain ranch house, a woman was holding her daughter in the early light, and a man who had spent 3 years learning how to need nothing was sitting beside her because she'd asked him to stay. He didn't move toward her. He didn't say the things that a different kind of story would have required him to say in this moment. He just sat, and she just held her daughter, and the morning continued its business of arriving. After a while she said, "Where will we go?" He looked at her. After Miles City, after the statements, after all of it. She was looking at the window. "Harriet is in Billings. That was the plan. Go to Harriet, start over." A pause. "That's still an option." "Yes," he said. "It is." She was quiet. He was quiet. The baby slept. "It's not the only option," she said, very carefully. He looked at the floor. at his hands, at the particular shape of a moment that a person could walk forward into or step back from, and how the whole weight of that choice sat differently than he'd expected it to. "No," he said, "it's not." She turned her head to look at him. "I'm not asking anything of you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. You have done more than Rose." She stopped. "I'm aware you're not asking," he said. "I'm telling you that it's not the only option because it's true. Because this mountain is big enough." He met her eyes. "Because Maggie is going to need somewhere to grow up, and this is good country for that." She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her face, slow and careful, and entirely real. "You haven't thought this through," she said. "I've been thinking it through since I found you on that trail," he said. "We barely know each other." "We know each other well enough," he said. "People have started with less." She was quiet a long time. The baby shifted in her arms. The morning was fully arrived now, full light through the window, the sound of horses in the pasture, the world conducting its ordinary business, with total indifference to everything that had just happened inside these walls. "You live alone on a mountain," she said. "I used to," he said. She pressed her lips together. He could see her holding back something that might have been a smile. "You don't cook very well," she said. "I cook adequately," he said. "You can cook better." "I can cook considerably better." "Then we complement each other," he said. The thing she was holding back won. It came through small, exhausted reel. She looked at her daughter. She looked at him. She looked at the room around her. The plain walls, the good mattress, the window with the mountains in it. "This is a strange situation," she said. "It is," he agreed. "You understand that everything is strange about this." "I do." "And you're still—" "Yes," he said, simply, without hesitation or decoration. "I'm still." A silence. Not an uncomfortable one. "All right," she said. Quiet. Final. The same word she'd used on the trail when she'd decided to trust him. The same word, meaning the same thing it had meant then, which was, "I have assessed this. I am choosing it. Don't make me say it twice." "All right," he said back. Outside he heard Aldous calling his name from the direction of the barn time to move time to manage the morning's business. Cross and his man to be transported, statements to be formalized, the long machinery of official justice to be set in motion. He stood. He looked at Rose and Maggie one more time. Mother and daughter in the early light, both of them new to the world in their different ways. "I'll be outside," he said. "I know," she said. "You'll come back." It was not a question. "I'll come back," he said. He went out to deal with Harlan Cross. And for the first time in 3 years, when he walked through the door of his own house, he was already thinking about coming back to it. That was new. It felt like the right kind of new. Aldous left before noon. He took Cross and the large man whose name turned out to be Dunmore a detail. Ethan filed away without particular interest, and he took the cedar box, and he shook Ethan's hand at the gate with the grip of a man who meant it. "I'll send word when the inquiry opens," Aldous said. "Shouldn't be more than 3 weeks. The territorial commissioner in Helena has been wanting a case like this for 2 years. He'll move fast." "Cross's other 2 men," Ethan said. "The ones who were watching from the trees." "Already gone," Aldous said. "Ran when they saw the federal badge. Men like that don't stay when the odds change." He settled his hat. "They'll surface eventually. Cross will need witnesses at his hearing, and his lawyers will call everyone who was on that mountain. I'll want statements from you and Mrs. Calloway before that happens." "You'll have them," Ethan said. Aldous looked at him for a moment, the particular look of a man who was adding things up without commenting on the sum. "You did good work here, Ethan." "Rose did the work," Ethan said. "I just provided the location." Aldous made a sound that might have been disagreement. Then he turned his horse and led his prisoners down the mountain trail, and was gone inside of 5 minutes, efficient as everything else about him. Ethan stood at the gate and watched until the sound of hooves faded entirely. Then he went back inside. Rose was asleep when he checked on her, Maggie tucked against her side, in the careful arrangement of a woman who had been sleeping next to something precious. He pulled the door mostly shut, and went to make coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the empty trail and thought about what came next. What came next was Miles City. Formal statements. The slow machinery of federal process that Aldous had warned them about. What came next after that was less certain. He was thinking about the specific uncertainty of it, which felt different than the uncertainty he'd been living in for 3 years, less like fog and more like open ground when he heard Maggie wake up. Not crying. A sound more like announcement. I am here. I have opinions. Someone should attend to this. He went to the doorway. Rose stirred but didn't fully wake. She was deeper under than she'd been, the specific weight of exhaustion finally claiming her properly, now that the danger was past and the birth was done. She'd been running on something other than rest for days, and her body had apparently decided it was finished negotiating. Maggie made her announcement again louder. Ethan crossed to the bed carefully. He picked up the baby with the same hands he used for everything, steady, deliberate, entirely without ceremony. Maggie looked at him. He looked at her. She was 4 hours old, and she had dark eyes that couldn't yet focus properly, and a very strong opinion about being awake that she was communicating clearly. All right, he said quietly, so as not to wake Rose. Come here. He carried her to the kitchen. He sat in the chair by the window and held her against his chest, the way he'd watched Rose hold her, and the baby settled with the immediate trust of someone who had not yet learned to doubt, and the two of them sat in the morning quiet and looked out at the Montana mountains. He had not held a child since Thomas. He had not let himself think about Thomas in months. He'd gotten very good at managing which thoughts he allowed access, and which ones he kept behind the door he'd built for them. 3 years of practice had made him proficient. But sitting here with Maggie against his chest, and the mountains out the window, the door opened a little on its own. Thomas had been 4. He'd had Margaret's eyes and Ethan's stubborn streak, and a laugh that was too big for his body, the kind of laugh that took over a room. He'd been afraid of the dark, and unafraid of horses, which Ethan had thought was exactly the right combination for a boy growing up on a mountain ranch. He sat with that for a moment. Let it be there. It hurt. It always hurt. But it was a different kind of hurt than it used to be, less like being cut open and more like pressing on a scar that had fully formed. The tissue was there. The healing was real. The mark would always be there, but a mark wasn't the same as a wound. Maggie made a small sound against his chest. Yeah, he said very quietly. I know. He didn't know what he was agreeing with. It didn't seem to matter. He was still sitting there when Rose appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her eyes tracking immediately to the baby. He looked up. She woke up. You needed sleep more. Rose looked at him holding her daughter. Something happened in her face that she didn't try to manage or contain. She just let it be there for a moment, open unguarded, and then she came and sat across from him and folded her hands on the table. How long have you been sitting here? She said. A while. Thinking about what? He looked at Maggie. Thomas, he said. Rose didn't fill the silence with condolence. She just sat with it the way he'd taught her, or maybe the way she'd known how before she met him, because people who had their own losses understood this instinctively. Tell me about him, she said. He looked up. You asked me about William, she said simply. I'd like to know about Thomas. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Maggie, who was studying the middle distance with the focused incomprehension of someone encountering existence for the first time. And he told her. He talked for a long time, longer than he'd talked about anything in 3 years. He told her about Thomas learning to walk and falling down and getting up with the particular determination of a child who had decided something and would not be argued with. He told her about the way the boy had named all 4 horses, and then been genuinely offended when one of the names he'd chosen, Senator, for no discernible reason, was considered undignified by the horse in question. He told her about the last morning, which he did not describe in detail, because some things needed only the outline and not the content, and she understood that and didn't press. He told her about Margaret, about the year before the fire, when things had been good, genuinely good, the kind of good that a person sometimes doesn't recognize while they're inside it. About Margaret's habit of reading aloud while he worked on tack at the kitchen table. About the way she'd argued with him about everything important, and agreed with him about everything small, and how he'd understood too late that that was exactly the right configuration. Rose listened to all of it. When he was done, the coffee he'd made had gone cold, and Maggie had fallen back to sleep against his chest, and the morning had moved on toward midday. "She sounds like someone worth the grief," Rose said. "She was," he said. "They both were." "Grief that big means love that big," she said. "I've decided that's how I think about it. The only other option is to think it means loss that big, and that's not survivable." He looked at her. "When did you decide that?" "Somewhere between Eleanor and William," she said. "It took both of them to get me there." A pause. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's how I make it through the day." "It's right," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You sound sure." "I am sure," he said. "Because the alternative is what I was doing for 3 years, and that's not living, that's just duration." He looked at Maggie. "This is different." "Is it?" she said. And the question was not rhetorical. She was actually asking. "Yes," he said. He met her eyes. "You know it is." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and very carefully she lifted Maggie from his arms. The baby resettled against her mother without waking. "I need to tell you something," Rose said. He waited. "Before I left Missouri, the week before." She looked at Maggie, not at him, which told him this was something she'd been holding. Cross's men came to the house. Not to break in, they knocked. There were 2 of them. They told me that if I handed over whatever William had gathered, they'd compensate me. Money. Enough to, they said, I could go anywhere, start over, the baby would be provided for. Ethan went very still. "I almost said yes," she said. Quiet. Direct. "I want you to know that." I stood in my doorway and I looked at those men, and I thought about Eleanor and about the baby and about how tired I was, and I almost said yes. He said nothing. "William's face stopped me," she said. "Not his memory exactly. His actual face, I could see it right there as clear as I can see you. And he looked exactly the way he looked when he talked about why it mattered. Like it was obvious. Like the question of whether to do the right thing was so settled it barely needed to be a question." She looked up. "I closed the door on them. I packed that night." "I know," Ethan said. She blinked. "You know, I know that you closed the door," he said. "Because you're here. And the box made it to Aldous." He held her gaze. "What you almost did doesn't matter. What you did is what matters." She looked at him for a long, searching moment. The morning light was on her face, and she looked exhausted and clear-eyed, and more herself than he'd seen her in the 2 days he'd known her, which was perhaps because she'd just set something down. "You're very sure about a lot of things," she said. "Not usually," he said. "This is a concentrated period." She made that sound again, not quite a laugh, the ghost of one. He was collecting them, he realized, adding them to a small internal inventory of things that were worth noting. "Miles City," she said. "When can I travel?" Aldous said there was no rush. 3 weeks is the outside on the inquiry opening. 2 weeks then, she said. "If Maggie is well." "If Maggie is well," he agreed. "And after Miles City," she said carefully. "After Miles City," he said equally carefully. She looked at the window, at the mountains, at the particular enormous blue of the Montana sky in August, which had nothing whatsoever to do with anything except that it was there and they were in it. "I haven't written to Harriet," she said. "She'll be worried." "You can write today," he said. "Brannigan's will take it down when their boy comes back through." I don't know what to tell her. Tell her you're safe, he said. Tell her about Maggie. The rest can wait. Rose was quiet for a moment. She's going to ask questions. About what? About. She made a small gesture that encompassed the kitchen, the house, the mountain, and approximately everything that had occurred in the last 48 hours. Tell her you're figuring it out, he said. She looked at him. Are we figuring it out? We are, he said. She held that for a moment. Then she nodded, not the quick, decisive nod she used when she'd made up her mind about something, but a slower one. The kind that meant she was letting herself believe something she hadn't been certain she was permitted to believe. All right, she said. Ted. 2 weeks passed. They were not simple weeks. Maggie had opinions about sleeping schedules and expressed them with the full force of her available communication tools, which were limited but effective. Rose healed slowly and pushed herself faster than Ethan thought was wise, and they had their first real argument about it on day 4, which was direct and unpleasant and resolved in under 10 minutes, because neither of them were people who benefited from prolonged disagreement. She won the argument incidentally. He hadn't been wrong exactly. She'd just been more persuasive about the specific things her body was telling her versus what he was inferring from the outside. He conceded the point because it was the accurate thing to do, and she didn't make anything of the concession, which he appreciated. The Brannigan boy came through on day 3 and took Rose's letter to Harriet, and on day 9 came back with a reply that Rose read at the kitchen table and then sat with for a while without speaking. Good news or complicated news, Ethan said. Harriet news, Rose said, which is its own category. She set the letter down. She's coming. He looked at her. Not to take us away, Rose said quickly. She wants to meet Maggie, and she wants to... She stopped, pressed her lips together in the expression she wore when Harriet had apparently said something that was either very kind or very pointed, and Rose was sorting out which. She said she wants to meet the man who had the sense to stop on that trail. What did you tell her about me? He said. The truth, she said. Which part? All of it, she said. And then she looked at him with that particular directness. She had the kind that didn't hedge and didn't soften, and didn't give you anywhere to hide from the thing being said. Is that all right? He thought about what the truth was assembled in order. A mountain cowboy who hadn't spoken to anyone outside necessity for 3 years. A man who had kept watch through 2 nights with a rifle across his knees for a woman he'd known for less than a day. A man who had held a newborn in his kitchen and talked about his dead son for the first time since the grave. That's all right, he said. They rode into Miles City on a Thursday in early September, 16 days after Maggie was born. Ethan had borrowed the Brannigan wagon, more appropriate than a horse for the distance with a newborn, and Rose sat beside him on the bench with Maggie bundled against her chest, and said very little for the first hour, which he understood was not absence, but the way she processed the fact of returning to the world after having been briefly removed from it. He understood that particularly well. The mountains behind them were already beginning to show the first colors of coming fall at the high elevations, not full color, yet just the suggestion of it, the way a thing announces itself before it arrives. He'd lived long enough on this mountain to know the signs. It's beautiful up here, Rose said, not quite to him, looking back over her shoulder at the peaks. Yes, he said. In the winter. Harder, he said. But still beautiful. Different. She turned back forward. I've never been through a Montana winter. They're honest, he said. They don't pretend to be anything other than what they are. She looked at him sideways. Unlike some things. Unlike a lot of things, he agreed. Maggie stirred between them. Rose adjusted her hold automatically with the ease that had developed in 16 days of constant negotiation between a mother and a new person. Ethan watched it from the periphery. The small fluency of it, the way Rose's hands always knew where Maggie was without looking. He thought about Thomas again, about Margaret, about the specific shape of a family which he had once understood from the inside and then had to learn to understand from the outside, like a man trying to describe a color he could no longer see. He could see it again now, Not the same color. Something adjacent. Something that was its own thing. Ethan, Rose said. When we get back. She stopped. When we get back, he said. I want to plant something, she said. If that's, I know it's your land. But I'd like to put something in near the east fence, where the soil looks good. Harriet says I have my mother's gift for growing things, and I've never had ground of my own to test it on. He looked straight ahead at the trail. The east fence gets good light in the morning and afternoon, he said. Wind breaks from the north in October. Good soil, like you said. A pause. Plant whatever you want. She was quiet for a moment. Whatever I want, she said, as though tasting the phrase. This is your home, he said, quietly, entirely without hesitation. The first time he'd said it out loud, and also the truest thing he'd said in recent memory. He heard her breath change, not dramatically, just slightly, the adjustment a person's breathing makes when something they've been afraid to want becomes a thing they're permitted to have. Okay, she said. Her word. The one she used when she'd decided. Okay, he said back. Miles City came up over the next rise, and the world's ordinary business storefronts, and wagon traffic, and the smell of a working town reached out to meet them, and they rode into it together. Bad. Aldous met them at the Federal Building on Main Street, and the formal statements took the better part of 2 hours. Rose was precise and thorough, just as she'd been with Aldous at the ranch, and the Federal Recorder, who was taking it all down in shorthand, looked up at her twice, with the expression of a man who was privately revising his initial assumptions about what a pregnant widow traveling alone through Montana territory might have to say. Ethan's statement was shorter. He had the particular gift of men who think before they speak, which is that when they do speak, the words are in the right order and nothing needs to be taken back. When it was done, Aldous walked them out to the street. Inquiry opens in Helena in 2 weeks, he said. You won't need to be there for the opening. We'll call for testimony when we're ready. He looked at them both. Harlan Cross has hired 3 lawyers from Denver. Rose's jaw tightened. Of course he has. Good lawyers, Aldous said. But William Calloway built a better case than 3 lawyers from Denver can dismantle. I want you to know that. He looked at Rose directly. He did good work, ma'am. It's going to hold. She pressed her lips together. Thank you, Aldous. Thank your husband, Aldous said, simply, without sentimentality. He did the work. She nodded. She held herself together. She was very good at it. Aldous shook hands with Ethan again. I'll be in touch. Then he looked down at Maggie, who was awake, and regarding him with the ancient skepticism of someone who had not yet decided what to make of mustaches. Healthy girl, he said. She's got opinions, Ethan said. Good, Aldous said. She'll need them. He tipped his hat to Rose. Safe travel. He went back inside. Rose stood on the boardwalk and held Maggie and looked at Miles City, going about its September business all around her, and Ethan stood beside her and said nothing, because nothing was needed. After a moment she said, I'd like to get a few things before we go back. We've got time, he said. There's a dry goods store on the next block. She said, I need fabric, and seeds. The fall catalog might still have what I want for the east fence. He looked at her. She looked back, entirely steady, entirely certain. Seeds, he said. For planting, she said. I told you. You told me. Are you going to stand there, or are you coming? She said. He came. They were back on the mountain road by 3 in the afternoon. The wagon loaded with dry goods, and 2 paper envelopes of seed packets that Rose had selected with the focused intensity she brought to everything she decided mattered. Maggie had slept through most of Miles City and was now awake and interested in the light through the trees and making the small editorial sounds that Ethan had already learned to interpret as neither complaint nor celebration, but simple commentary on existence. He was learning her language. It was coming faster than he expected. Harriet will be here in 3 weeks, Rose said. She said she'd take the stage to Billings and hire a man to bring her up the mountain road. I'll go down to meet her, Ethan said. The upper road isn't well marked from the south. She won't want you to fuss. I'm not fussing, he said. I'm providing navigation. Rose's mouth curved. She's going to like you, she said. She has very specific opinions about men, and most of them are unfavorable, but she likes quiet ones. She says quiet men are either thinking or dangerous, and either way, they're more interesting than the ones who talk too much. Which do I fall into? He said. Thinking, Rose said without hesitation. Definitely thinking. He absorbed this. What convinced you? She looked at him sideways. The way you held Maggie in the kitchen that first morning, she said. Dangerous men don't sit that still. He had nothing to say to that. He looked at the trail. What did you think about? She said. In the kitchen. You had that look. Thomas, he said. And what it meant that I was able to think about him without... He paused, found the right word. Without shutting the door. She was quiet for a moment. That's the room, she said. He looked at her. William's room, she said. The one he said you have to live in before you can move through it. She looked at the mountains. I think you moved through. He thought about that. About the specific feeling in the kitchen that morning. The door opening on its own. The hurt that was present and not destructive the way Maggie had settled against his chest, like she didn't know he was a man who had reasons to be careful. I think I did, he said. Good, she said, quiet and certain. It was time. He let that sit. He let the wagon carry them up the mountain road, and Maggie made her small editorial sounds, and the September light came through the trees at the angle it comes when the season is beginning to understand itself, and the world was ordinary and specific and entirely real. They came over the last rise, and the ranch came into view below the house, the barn, the pasture, the horses moving in the afternoon light. He'd looked at this view 1,000 times and felt nothing in particular, which was exactly what he'd built it to produce. He looked at it now and felt something he had no immediate name for but recognized anyway. The way you recognize a person you haven't seen in years, not from the details, but from something that was there before the details. Home. That was the word, not the structure. The word. There it is, Rose said. There it is, he said. Maggie made a sound that was either agreement or a request for attention. Probably both. He brought the wagon down the last stretch of trail and through the gate and into the yard, and he set the brake and climbed down and came around to help Rose, because she was still moving carefully and wouldn't ask but didn't mind the offered hand. She took it, stepped down with Maggie against her shoulder, stood in the yard and looked at the house. I'm going to paint the door, she said, if that's all right. He looked at the door. It was the original wood-weathered gray, entirely functional. What color? He said. Green, she said. A good dark green, the kind that doesn't apologize for being what it is. He thought about that. I've got paint in the barn. Of course you do, she said. Not green. I'll add it to the list for next time in town. He looked at the door. He looked at her. He thought about a dark green door on this house that he had built to be invisible and functional and sufficient, and he thought about what it would look like and what it would mean to look at it, and he found that he wanted it. Wanted it specifically and clearly. Green, he said. Green, she confirmed. She went inside. He stood in the yard for a moment alone and looked at the mountains and breathed the September air and held the weight of the last 16 days in both hands, turning it over, looking at the shape of it. 2 days ago, he had been a man living inside his grief with the focused discipline of someone who had decided that was the appropriate response to catastrophic loss. Now he was a man with a house that was going to have a green door and seeds for the east fence, and a woman inside who had opinions about paint and planting, and quiet men, and a baby who had decided he was acceptable, and all of it was real and specific and right here. He didn't know exactly what came next. He knew that was all right. He knew that Rose would be in the kitchen when he went inside, and Maggie would be in the room down the hall, and Harriet was coming in 3 weeks, and the inquiry would open in Helena, and William Calloway's work would matter the way William Calloway had believed it would matter, and the east fence would have something growing along it by spring. He knew that he would sit across from Rose at the kitchen table tonight, and she would drink her coffee too fast, the way she always did, and say something that caught him sideways, and he would say something back that made her make that sound, the almost laugh, the real one. He knew that somewhere in the coming months, slowly, and without announcement, the particular shape of this life would declare itself, and it would be different from every other life he'd imagined living, and it would be his. He walked toward the house. The door opened before he reached it. Rose already, because she'd been watching from inside, the way she watched for things she'd decided to keep track of. "You stood out there a long time," she said. "I was thinking," he said. "About what?" He stepped through the door. The house was warm and smelled like coffee, and there was a sound from down the hall that was Maggie beginning to form another opinion. "The door," he said. Dark green was right. She looked at him for a moment with the particular clear-eyed look she had, the one that saw further than the surface of whatever he'd just said. "It's going to look like it always belonged there," she said. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I was thinking." She held his gaze for one more long moment. Then she turned toward the sound of Maggie and went down the hall, and he closed the door behind him and stood in his house, which was different now, which was full, which was the word he'd been unable to find for 3 years and had just recovered. Full, not heavy, not crowded, not the kind of full that pressed down, the kind that holds. Outside, the Montana mountains went on being enormous and old and entirely indifferent to the small human things happening in their shadow. Inside, a baby declared herself. A woman answered. A man who had spent 3 years learning how to need nothing stood in his kitchen and let himself need everything that was right here. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was in the end exactly what enough had always been waiting to look like. Not the absence of loss. Not the erasure of grief, not a story with the hard parts removed. Just a door worth painting green and seeds for the spring, and a woman who closed the door on the wrong men and drove 300 miles through danger to deliver her dead husband's truth to the right hands, and a baby who had arrived in the dark of a mountain morning and looked at the world with the confidence of someone who had already decided it was worth the trouble, and a man who had stopped on a trail in August heat because something older than his grief had moved in him and said, "This one. Not this time. You do not ride past this one." He was glad he listened. He would be glad for the rest of his life. And that life, the real one, the full one. The one that had been waiting for him on the other side of 3 years of necessary darkness, that life started here. On a mountain in Montana, in a house with a weathered gray door that was about to become dark green. And it was good.